We're so glad that you've joined us for this week's message from Anchor Chapel in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Our hope is that you will be both encouraged and challenged in your relationship with Jesus. Be blessed as you listen to this week's message.
I was at Lowe's the other day, as I have been multiple times every day over the last couple of weeks, getting construction and everything done. I'm at Lowe's, and if you know like the lighting and electrical area, I'm in that area, and I'm looking for like these certain covers for these lights. So I'll walk up on the aisle, and as soon as I walk up, I see this guy walk straight up to me. And like, I don't know if you ever have experience with somebody who's like just a little too close, like for comfort, where like the guy just walks like straight up on the side of me. And like, I'm looking right here, and like, it's not my store, but how you can be like possessive when you're on the aisle, and you're like, this is my area right now. Like, don't come all up in my business. So I walk up to the area, and I'm looking, and he just walks right up to me, and he's looking. I'm thinking like, okay, like the guy's looking for the same thing I'm looking for, I guess. Like I'll just give him a little bit of space. So like, I'm just playing it cool, and I'm like acting like I'm not really looking for what's right there in front of me. So I'm like, let me just look down here a little bit. So I walk over here a little bit. Dude just like walks with me, takes a couple of steps with me, and I'm like, come on, man. Like, what are the chances you looking for the same thing I'm looking for? So I'm like, I'm gonna try the other side. So I walk around him on the other side, and I start going down the aisle a little bit. Dude looks at me, starts walking with me. I'm like, okay, what's going on, man? I'm making sure that like my wedding ring is like really noticeable, like just in case. I'm like, man, I just want this good dude to know, like I'm not available. I'm not here to help you. I don't work here, whatever. So I'm moving down the aisle, and then like I just keep going down the aisle. I take another, I switch sides of the aisle, and I'm like, let me just test the waters here and see what's going on. So I walk across like 10 feet down, and I look on the opposite side. Dude comes straight up to me, walks with me, and I'm like, okay, he's going to either get punched, something's about to go down, I don't know what's going to happen. But when I turn around to meet him, I'm like, I'm just going to get out of this aisle. I turn around to meet him, and he locks eyes with me. He puts his hand on my back, and he says, hey, can I ask you and then he looks at me, and he says, oh no, I thought you were someone else. And I realized this whole time, he thought I was his buddy that he came to Lowe's shopping with. So he puts his hand on my back. He's like, I thought you were someone else. And he jets. I never saw nobody leave fast enough. Like he took out that place like he sold something, but he didn't. He's just like so embarrassed. He just left Lowe's. And I was like, oh man, that was such an awkward and funny experience. I'm telling this to Judah the other day. And Judah's like, this stuff happens? Like my 4-year-old son, he's like, his eyes were big. He was like, what is going on? Why would someone do that? It's like such a weird experience. But the funny thing about it is like this dude thought I was one person, and he felt completely comfortable. And then all of a sudden, when he realized I wasn't that person, and not only was I not that person, but he put it all together that I was trying to get away from him, he was like, I'm totally not welcome in this relationship. I'm out of here. Dude jets, okay? And I was like, man, how interesting is it that like I believe that this is happening now in our churches. That there are people who are hungry for God, who are hungry for relationship, who are hungry for a place to belong, a place to fit, and they're trying to find someone who will accept them, who will welcome them, who will say, you can be a part, you can be on my aisle, you can be with me. But too many times people come and they find people who say, I don't know you, I don't recognize you, you don't fit in relationship with me, I don't have the time for this. So it ends up being a break, and you never see that person again. I wonder how many people walk through our doors and they have a bad experience when they don't see a reaching people, a reaching church. They don't feel welcome, and you never see them again. How sad is it that people who don't know Jesus would walk out of our doors feeling embarrassed, like I thought I would be welcome there. I thought I would have a place. I thought I would have a home, but turns out I was wrong. And I just believe that it's the heart of Jesus, that we would be a reaching place. That yes, when people come into our doors, we would be a place of comfort and welcoming people, and that they would love us, but that we're also not just a church within the four walls, but we are a church that is reaching far outside and loving people right where they are. That's why our church started in a nightclub. That's why we started at the Varsity Theater. As a statement as a church, we believe that we needed to say, we'll go wherever people who don't know Jesus are. We'll go wherever they are. And then we came to the movie theater. Now we're going to be going to a place that, this is amazing that we've got a building and a space, but it's in a community where there are middle-class people, there are poor people, there are rich people, there are students. We're in a hub of potential. There's a lot of potential there, and I pray that we don't go into that place and waste it. That we would understand before we set foot in there and before we have our first experience, that we would understand that we are called to be a church that reaches people right where they are. That needs to be our heart and our spirit as we head into it. Matthew 18, reading out of Christian Standard Bible today. I normally preach out of the NLT because it just like rolls off of my tongue easier. It's like the IQ level for the NLT is a little lower, so I feel easier. It's like easier for me to read it. But the CSB I find is a really faithful interpretation. So I'm going to be reading out of this for this one. It says this in verse 15: "If your brother sins against you, go and rebuke him in private. If he listens to you, you have won your brother. But if he won't listen, take one or two others with you, so that the testimony of two or three witnesses, every fact may be established. If he doesn't pay attention to them, tell the church. If he doesn't pay attention to even the church, let him be like a Gentile and a tax collector to you." Now you might be thinking, what in the world does this have to do with reaching? I'm going to get there. But this was interesting. I've always read this passage, and I've always thought, Jesus addresses someone who's done something wrong in the church. And the perspective is, when they do something that's wrong, I want to just kind of break this passage down a little bit. The first thing that I see is something that we don't often do very well. But I think the first thing Jesus mentions and the first thing he talks about, if someone does wrong against you, it says, if your brother sins against you, go and rebuke him in private, or go address him in private, go talk to him in private. I think one of the things that we get so wrong is that Jesus would ask us today, and he would tell us today, never gossip. There is never space for gossip. I cannot tell you how much of a poison gossip can be. But in what Jesus is saying, he's saying, listen, there's never a time for you to go and confide in someone and, let me tell you about, just so that you know how to pray for them. Let me tell you what's going on with this relationship or with this other person. But instead, we end up gossiping and spewing poison instead of actually doing what Jesus said, go try and win that brother back. So instead of winning someone back, we end up pushing them away because we end up having this spirit of gossip where instead I'm just going to let everybody know how right I am and how wrong they are so I can look better than them. We don't have their best interests in mind. We've got our best interests in mind. And I just think that that's one of the things that I'm just like, you see it, you know it. You might be a gossiper today, or you might have experienced it today. And the thing about gossip is, man, it's fun. It's juicy. Like, you want to know what's up. You want to be in the know. You want to have all that. You want to have that knowledge. And I had a minister that, man, whenever we were like growing up, I just remember like it was just a caution, like, don't tell this guy anything because he's going to tell everybody. Like, you're going to find out from somebody else and from somebody else and somebody else that like your business got out. So you confess something and like all of a sudden other people know you. Like, how in the world, like, God, did you tell that? And it's like, oh no, it was so-and-so. Like, this pastor would go in, and this guy just has a reputation for being a gossip. So everybody's like, don't tell him anything. Don't tell him nothing real. But he would like corner you and be like, hey, what's going on? Tell me a little bit about, and he would just like, tell me about this. Did you hear about that? And he would like try to like give you a little bit of gossip so that you'd feel like you're part of it. And then he'd be like, so what's going on with you? And you're like, I ain't falling for that. But this guy had a reputation. And it wasn't a reputation for building, it was a reputation of gossip. And I just think that that's one of the things that, man, if you ever want to close somebody off, if you ever want to end relationships, you just become a gossiper. You go close off relationships right away. And I think about, what does gossip look like today? We might not have gossip in closed corners and dark corners and talking behind people's backs as much today, but we do a lot of this online, and there's a term for it on Twitter anyway. It's called like subtweeting, where you're talking about someone, but you're not really using their name or anything, but you're just kind of talking about them, and everybody knows you're talking about them. And like kids will do that. They talk about their parents, online, like subtweeting, like their parents would ever read it anyway. But, it's like you've got this culture where people they feel safe and empowered to talk about someone or to trash talk someone in this experience where they feel safe online. Isn't it amazing how brave people get online? They get all brave and they think it's not brave, it's cowardly to do that. It's cowardly to become a gossip. Jesus says, do the brave thing and go to that person. Why should you go to that person? Because if your heart is to win the brother, then you care about the person more than winning that argument. But how many of us care about winning an argument so much so that we will lose the brother in the process? And we see that all today. God did not call us to be passionate liberals or conservatives or anything. He called us to be passionate about the lost brothers or sisters. He called us to bring people into relationship with him. This is what he's calling us to. And I think that if we can get this thing, this is the beginning of reconciliation. God's called us to try and reconcile each other to him. But a spirit of gossip can be a poison that can affect the whole church. So you might have that temptation online, but I would challenge you, just because you can win the argument with getting your followers to like be on your side and you lose someone, you really lost. You didn't actually win. You really lost. So this is one of the first things I want you to get today if you're writing anything down. Small people gossip, but big people attempt reconciliation. Small people gossip, big people attempt reconciliation. That's what Jesus does. Jesus reconciles people to himself. So if you want to be someone who's your world's all about you and you're never reaching and it's all and you live this selfish circle, you keep gossiping, you keep doing that. But if you want to reach people, if you want to be someone who reaches out, then you become a person who's known for reconciliation instead of gossip. Gossip cares about self, but confrontation cares about others. And it might seem odd. Many of us are like, we don't like confrontation, but if you really love someone, you'll confront them. And you'll say, man, that thing you did either hurt me or that thing I did to you was wrong. Let's reconcile. Let's fix this thing. Let's make this thing right. I love the terminology that Jesus uses. That he says, you have won your brother. The goal, the idea is to win your brother. At Anchor, this is one of our things that we always want. We always put people first, that we want to reach people. More than we want to have our voice heard or this message or this stand that we have for something, we care about individual people, that we want to reach the individuals. We want to win our brother first. So I believe that means in relationship with you, that you've got to have relationship with people where you are reconciling on a personal level. So, I don't think that you can fix the world from just making, this drop the mic tweet online or different kinds of things. I think that reconciliation happens in relationship with other people. If you want to reconcile, if you want to restore broken or dead relationships or even the racial issues that we see in our country, it begins with personal relationships. You getting out of your comfort zone, stretching yourself, asking for forgiveness, and you making a difference in that relationship. That's how it begins to happen. I think there's two very different interpretations to what Jesus is saying in this passage. So one interpretation is according to the flesh, and this is honestly how I've interpreted this my whole life. So Jesus says, you go and try to make it right with this person. They won't listen. You get a couple elders. If they won't listen to the elders, you bring it to the church. They won't listen to the church, then you treat them as a Gentile or a tax collector. I've always thought interpretation one is this person, you've given them all the chance that you can. Now they're just going to be a harm to your church. Treat them like a Gentile, a tax collector. Get them out of your church. This is one interpretation, and I think this is one that the church has taken often, and it has the liberty, has had the liberty to take for a long time. Interpretation two is a lot more challenging. And this is what I believe that Jesus is really saying. If you try to reconcile with someone and they don't listen, then you get a couple elders, they won't listen. Then you get the church involved, they won't listen. Treat them like a Gentile or a tax collector. You have to think about what Jesus was saying and where this was even written. This is written in the book of Matthew. And what I love about this perspective and that this story and this statement is even in here is if you know who Matthew was, the Bible says that Matthew was a tax collector. Now, why was a tax collector a big deal? Why was a tax collector an issue? A tax collector was known as someone who would rip people off. That while they were collecting from people, the individuals, that they would also just say, oh, you actually owe the government this much. There was no checks and balances. There was no accountability. They would often double that amount and keep that half for themselves. And they would say, you really owe this? You didn't owe it, but they would steal from you. People hated going to Jackson Hewitt to get their taxes done because they knew that they were going to be ripped off. So they would show up at Matthew's tax collector booth and they would realize that, oh man, we're going to get ripped off. I think interpretation 2 is so much different than interpretation 1. Jesus says, if this person doesn't listen, they won't be restored. Treat them as a Gentile or a tax collector. I don't know if you know this or not, but most of us in this room, I would guess, are Gentiles, meaning you're not a Jew. You're not of Jewish heritage. I thank God that he did not treat me like an outsider, but instead he came and he made a way for all, for Gentiles, for tax collectors, for everybody to know Jesus. So I think that the interpretation of what Jesus is saying is that we never stop pursuing the lost. We never stop pursuing those who have wronged us, who have done wrong, who have hurt the church, who have hurt you. You never stop pursuing them. Treat them like a Gentile or a tax collector does not mean get them out of the church, but instead treat them like someone who needs to see Jesus again for the first time. Maybe the reason that you can't reconcile with them is because they've seen a terrible example of Jesus. But instead, let's once again introduce people to Jesus. Once again, treat them like a Gentile or a tax collector. Let them see the gospel of Jesus at work. This is a completely different perspective. This is the second thing I want you to get today. If you're going to understand the heart of Jesus and what it means to be reaching, is that when winning people is the goal, Gentiles and tax collectors aren't the enemy. When winning people is the goal, Gentiles and tax collectors aren't the enemy. Now, what you've got to notice about this is that Gentiles maybe not as offensive, other than the super religious people would be offended by Gentiles, but tax collectors offend everybody. They rip everybody off. And what I love about this perspective is that we are not called to shun, but instead we're called to reach. So instead of us being a church that shuns people who aren't like us, who do life like us, talk like us, sound like us, or whatever, instead we are constantly reaching people with the gospel. This is the heart of Jesus. This is what Jesus is trying to do. So the grace that you've been given, don't conceal it. Instead, give it away. Look for those who don't seem like they would fit in the church or fit in relationship with you, and invite them into relationship with you. Invite them to church. Invite them to relationship with Jesus. That's what it means to be reaching. And it's really sad today what's happening in the church as a whole. This youngest generation of people coming up, 18 to 29-year-olds, this generation attends church the least of any generation ever. That means that the older that they get, and really, as you see this like multiply this effect, that generation after generation, generations have a tendency to go to church if their parents went to church. So this generation that's not going to church, or is not going to church as much because they see that the church isn't as relevant. Maybe their parents didn't go as much. Their parents were not living what they claimed. They went to church, but it didn't really make a big difference. This next generation that will come up after them will attend church even less. And I'm not saying that attending church is salvation. But there is something to be said about people who go to church. That means you have some kind of a faith that you're trying to follow. You're trying to honor Jesus with your life and with your week and trying to make him first in your life. So I think it does reflect something that's very serious in our nation, that people are attending church less and less as we go on. That means that the church, actually, if you look at it, for our population in America, for the average church size to be able to reach our nation, and not even like everybody be in church, but just for an average amount of people to be in church, we would need 10,000 more churches in America. And some people wonder, why would you plant a church? Why would you start a church? There are already churches here. You would need 10,000 more churches in America to reach people, like just normal percentages. You know that under 18% of people in America actually attend church on a regular basis? And this is like consistent attenders. Most people who do attend church less than 12 times a year. So this is about one time a month that they would just come and they're kind of just do their thing and say hello to everybody, but they're not really connected or committed. And I think that you see this reflected in the way that our culture is moving forward, and you see the vitriol and the hate, and there's just a lack of Christian values in the culture that's reflected in this. There are people that need Jesus in our nation. And I believe the church is still the answer to that. The church needs to be a church that is reaching, that is constantly reaching. And one of the things that I see that concerns me the most, and it's just heartbreaking, because I've felt this too, that churches feel good about themselves when their numbers rise, but studies have shown that most mega churches are made up of transfer growth, meaning that someone left another church and went to their church. And I don't think that the kingdom of heaven, the model of the kingdom of heaven, is that sheep would hop fences and find greener grass. But this is what ends up happening in the church. And as a pastor, the temptation is make the grass greener at Anchor than it is somewhere else, so that people would like our experience more than their experience. This is not what the gospel is. The gospel is meant and is established, and the church exists to reach those who are lost, not to reach those who are already found. And this is one of the things that is such a temptation because we like comfort. Every single one of us like comfort. I like it, you like it, and that's one of the reasons that we see the church not really growing. There's not more people coming to Jesus necessarily, even though the seats may be filled. We've got a lot of sheep who are more comfortable in one place than they were in another. And I'm not saying we don't focus on those who know Jesus. We need to grow and our faith needs to develop. But if your faith is being developed and you're not reaching the lost, is your faith really being developed? Because what we're called to do when we're followers of Jesus is to constantly be reaching those who are not reached. We're called to be a church that is reaching. Who are you reaching? Who have you reached? Who have you invited into relationship with you or into church with you? Who have you invited or included to be a part of your faith, of what Jesus has transformed in your life? And, some people say, you don't like the term lost. I've said the word lost a couple of times. Lost people. If you really believe the gospel, you use words like lost. Because Jesus in Luke 15 gives 3 stories. He talks about a lost sheep, he talks about a lost coin, and he talks about a lost son. And you can relate, and people listening to his stories can relate to him on some level. Either it's something they valued, the coin. Either it's a thing that was their lifestyle, a sheep, a shepherd would have had a lifestyle. Yeah, or maybe it was a relationship like a son. Everybody, Jesus tells these 3 stories to say, I want you to understand what it's like to lose something that matters to you. And he says, when you lose something, you do everything you can to get that thing back. Jesus gives a picture of something being lost that needs to be found. This is how he looks at those who don't know Jesus. This is how he looks at those who are not Christians, that they're called lost, because the gospel is so clear that without Jesus, there is an eternity of torment away from him. And I think that that's part of the reason we become so comfortable is we don't believe that part of the gospel anymore. That the church has bought this lie that people are pretty good. What do you mean they're lost? They're doing pretty well. They don't really need the church. And we've let all these little things creep in. But without Jesus, we are lost and headed for eternal destruction. And I don't want to be a downer, but I'm saying if we're going to reach, why in the world would we reach? So people would be happy, so people would have an anchor group, so people would have nice relationships. That is nothing for eternity. That counts for nothing. No one's going to be married or given in marriage in heaven. None of that stuff matters. The only thing that matters in this life is what we do with Jesus. And if we don't spend our life giving it away to reach people who don't know Jesus, we've wasted our time here. As a church, we're called to reach people. It is the utmost important. It's the most important thing that we do as a church, that we reach people with the gospel of Jesus. Earlier this year, we went to Disney World, and I told this story a few months ago, but I just was reminded because Brooke and I were talking about this, that the first night that we're there, we have family and all there, and they have fireworks shows and everything. We're all the way in the back, where you walk in, the Main Street area, and we're watching the fireworks, and this is the scene. Judah is right in front of me, my 4-year-old son. He had just turned 4 at the time. And Brooke goes to the gift shop and she says, watch Judah, I'm going to the gift shop. And I'm going to buy something, I'll be right back. So I'm taking photos that night because I'm going to take photos of the fireworks and all that stuff. I'm standing with my dad and I'm just snapping away photos. 5 or 10 minutes pass and I look down and Judah's not in the seat. He's not in the car seat next to me. And I turn to my dad and immediately I felt like this chill go through me, And I turned to my dad and I said, Dad, do you have Judah or did you see Judah? And he looks down and he looks at me and said, no, I didn't see him. I turn around and I'm frantically looking. Ernest and Liz are with us. I find one of them. I find Ernest. Did you see Judah? If Judah's going to be anywhere, he's going to be with Pop. So I look, if you know him, you know this. So I find Pop and I said, did you see Judah? I didn't see Judah. I start panicking. I text Brooke. I'm like, do you have Judah? She texts back immediately, no, I don't have Judah. Nobody has Judah. And there's how many 1,000 to 40,000 people can fit in Magic Kingdom? We're freaking out. It's the middle of the night, all these people around. I run to the gift shop and I meet Brooke there. And as I'm running over there, frantically looking, somebody runs up to me, a parent runs up to me and says, did you lose a child? And I say, yes, I lost my son. He says, my wife has him, and I'm going to get her to come over here. We saw him crying and walking around. So somebody had just grabbed him. Then they found a Disney worker immediately. They knew what to do. Brooke walks out. We find our son. It's just a moment where we're both shaking and shaken. And it's just like we lost our boy. There was nothing in the world that mattered more than finding Judah. Nothing mattered. I could have taken my camera and thrown it in the garbage. That little thing that had distracted me for that moment. I could have thrown it away because the only thing that mattered was finding my son. And I was talking to Brooke about it this week, and she said, we would have never been the same if we would have lost Judah that day. Our relationship would have never been the same. We may have made it, maybe not, but the only thing that mattered was our son. And I just thought, this is the heart of God. The only thing that matters to him is his lost children. The only thing. He doesn't care about all the things that distract us and get us all caught. God cares about the details in your life. Don't get me wrong, but not everything pales in comparison to the lost. And he wants us to reach, he wants us to care. He wants us to love them. He wants us to do everything that we can to go to where they are. So I don't want to build a country club church that just has better amenities than the other churches. I want to build a church that is reaching those that God is crying for, that God cares about more than anything else in the world. So I would ask you, what kingdom are you a part of? Are you a part of the kingdom of self, or are you a part of the kingdom of heaven? Because here's the last thing. Heaven is always reaching out to bring people in. Heaven is always reaching out to bring people in. I'm going to ask the band to come up as I get ready to close. But one of the things that really solidifies this story, if you look earlier in the book of Matthew, I said Matthew was a tax collector. This is so fascinating. Matthew 9, verse 9 through 19. It says this: Jesus went on from there, and he saw a man named Matthew sitting at the toll booth. So Matthew, when he finds Matthew the tax collector, he's doing tax collector things. He's right when Jesus finds him, he's ripping people off. And he said to Matthew, this is what he says. He doesn't say, "You sinner, stay away from me," but he says, "Follow me." And he got up and followed him. While he was reclining at the table at the house, many tax collectors and sinners came to eat with Jesus and his disciples. So Jesus tells Matthew, "Come and follow me." And then later you see Jesus is at Matthew's house hanging out. I don't know if Jesus understands what following means, because he told Matthew to follow him, but he went to Matthew's house. But this is what I think Jesus looks like. That Jesus goes right where nobody else will go. Jesus goes right to the place where everybody would say, "You don't belong there. Jesus doesn't, but God doesn't belong there. This is a sinful place. This is a terrible place. You're sitting on a couch. You're enjoying food that was bought with stolen money. You're in the shelter of this place that was bought with immorality." But Jesus is in the mix of the sinners. When the Pharisees saw this, verse 11, they asked the disciples, "Why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners?" And when he heard this, Jesus said, "It is not those who are well that need a doctor, but those who are sick." And he says this is such a deep thing to say. Go and learn what this means. He tells the Pharisees, and then he quotes scripture. They would know scripture better than anyone else. He says this: "I desire mercy and not sacrifice, for I did not come to call the righteous, but the sinners." And the reason that this would upset them so much, he says, go and learn what this verse means. I desire mercy and not sacrifice. Jesus is quoting from the book of Hosea, a very deeply sobering book. It's of a prophet. His name is Hosea. God challenges him to marry Gomer, a prostitute, and to keep going back to her again and again, even though she would be unfaithful and leave him many times. The story of Hosea is that he goes back, and he, even at the end of the book, buys her back from her pimp. And God says, this is to illustrate my love for my people. That even though they would run so far from me, and they would be so lost and so forgotten and so distant, that I will never stop chasing them down. My love will never stop chasing them. That's why I love this song that we're singing, Reckless Love. It seems reckless that God would do what he does, but he loves the lost. He loves people so much. And so the religious people would upset them so much. How could you tell us, go and learn what scripture means? We know it, but they had forgotten God's heart for the lost. And this is why they're so frustrated. Why would you eat with people like this? And Jesus is here to remind us of what God's heart really is. It's not just to build churches. It's not just to remodel buildings so that we can have a better place and we don't have to set up, but so that we can have a hub of hope for the community where people can come and see Jesus at work in their life. A place of invitation, a place where people would see that I'm welcome and I'm wanted and I'm needed here. Jesus is trying to remind us today that we need to be a church that is forever reaching. So I want to close today and challenge you Are you someone who came in today that has needed someone to reach out to you? If so, the great news is Jesus is reaching right now. He wants you. He loves you. Right where you are, he wants to reach your heart. And you're not too much of a sinner. You're not too lost. It's impossible. He's loving you. He's reaching you right now. And for those of us who are maybe one of the sheep, maybe you found this church because you like the grass and you thought it was greener than your last place, or maybe you're testing it out right now. I want everybody to know, if you call this place your home, then you are called to reach. This is what we are as a church. This is what Anchor will always be about, that we will always care about those who don't know Jesus yet. And the moment you get connected and get plugged in, is to be activated. It's not just so that you can be comfortable and you can climb some ladder of influence, but it's so that you would know Jesus and let those who don't know him know him. We're all activated immediately that people would know Jesus. This is my heart. This is what I want our heart to be. So I'm going to ask you to stand up right now, and I want us to just pray for those who don't know Jesus right now. We're going to sing this as we wrap this up. I want us to just sing and let this spirit in this room be a spirit of reaching. If the Spirit of God is trying to reach you today, let him reach your heart. If he's trying to challenge you to be one who reaches, then let him challenge you to be one who reaches.
Thank you for joining us for this week's message from Anchor Chapel. If you'd like to support the ministry of Anchor Chapel, you can easily do so on our website at anchorchapel.com. You can also follow us on social media at Anchor Chapel. Be blessed, and we'll see you next week.